This is Ed Stetzer Live. This and every Saturday at this time, we come with you with important, helpful conversations, discussions about church and mission and the gospel and the culture, and often timely with questions and things that may be on your mind. And today, we're going to actually talk about disaster relief ministry. How do we respond to moments like this and more? I will share with you that I'm actually very passionate about this subject because of probably my former work at the North American Mission Board. I was there at the North American Mission Board, and when I was meeting with a group of young pastors when I think it was Hurricane Katrina was about to hit. And so the North American Mission Board, along with organizations like Samaritan's Purse and others, have large disaster relief operations. You can actually see them, depending on who they are, by the color of their shirts, believe it or not. You know, the North American Mission Board had the yellow hats and the yellow shirts, and we'll talk about Samaritan's Purse in just a minute as well. But I had these young pastors in the headquarters there, and I don't know, these young pastors were sort of like unhappy with the denomination and unsure whether they want to be a part. And so we were having this discussion about why working together enables us to accomplish some things. And it just happened to be that it was during this hit. So I walked them down to this auditorium at our building. It was called the Day Auditorium. It's named after Cecil B. Day, who founded Days Inns, who was a donor to these things. And in there, my team was in charge of research. So we had geocoded the location of all of our disaster relief units that were particular to our denominational family. And in the niche that is disaster relief, the people who work in our denominational family did feeding stations and some other things. But anyway, so you have to know that when a hurricane's about to come in, you don't put units in the path of the hurricane. So it's sort of like you don't really know where the hurricane's going to go quite. So they're sort of placed outside, but some pre-place, they get in place beforehand, and then after the hurricane hit, they would be deployed, and part of my team's job was to track where they were. And I got to tell you, it was one of the finest moments that I've seen in disaster relief. Now, again, remember I was just working for one entity at the time, and to see all these folks, all these Jesus-loving. And you got to remember, Katrina hit in New Orleans, a very urban context, but the disaster relief teams were from Alabama and Mississippi and from Texas. And all these guys, I got to tell you, man, they got more chainsaws per capita in those states than any other place. And they descended into these hard-hit communities, urban areas, rural areas. Man, they just showed and shared the love of Jesus. No, man, that's such a beautiful thing. That's so what the gospel, well, it's just a gospel opening opportunity, but it's also kind of one of the expressions of God's mission is to join him serving the hurting, join Jesus on mission. So I'm really excited today to have with you one of the key leaders in and around this space, Edward Graham. Some of you know the name, the Graham family. I've had the privilege of meeting and being with Edward on more than one occasion. He's now the Chief Operating Officer overseeing international and domestic operations of Samaritan's Purse. And when it comes to disaster relief organizations, Samaritan's Purse is among the best known, the most regarded. Anyway, he travels frequently to disaster areas to coordinate operations, encourages families impacted by catastrophic events, meets with government officials, church leaders, establishes relationships, work with support. He's overseen Samaritan's Purse responses to several major world crises, such as Ukraine, the 2023 earthquake in Turkey, Israel-Hamas war, Hurricane Helene, and more. He graduated from the United States Military Academy. Matter of fact, I've never seen Edward. Every time I've seen him, he's in a full and rather intimidating uniform. And then he went to serve 18 years in the Army, and he's the youngest son of Franklin and Jane Graham and the grandson of Billy Graham. Edward, it's good to have you on the program. Good to hear your voice again.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate this opportunity. Thanks for highlighting disaster relief and that there are a lot of people. We see Baptists. I see yellow shirts almost everywhere I go. Saw them this past week down in Texas. So always very grateful for the North American Mission Board and the work they do out there.
Yeah, and you're orange shirts, right? Is that right? Or what is that color?
That's right. Yeah, Dad likes orange, blaze orange. It's easy to spot out there. We do it for safety reasons. But Dad even puts it on some of our equipment and stuff now. Maybe it's because he was a deer hunter. He just likes blaze orange.
Well, and even that, people don't realize, I remember after 9/11, all the folks who just wanted to help. And really, I mean, there were some actually neat stories of people helping. But the point of the shirts is to say these are organized and trained people who know what they're doing, and just sort of showing up in your car and you're saying what help. It's not always the best thing to do. There may be some crises where you just need a lot of people to help. So tell us how somebody becomes a disaster relief volunteer. You know, I know they're a staff too, but how does someone become a disaster relief volunteer in the Samaritan's Purse world?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. You bring that up. So let's bring up, for example, what just happened down in Texas, and it breaks your heart. But Samaritan's Purse will always partner and work through a local church. Matter of fact, we even have lighthouse churches that are known churches throughout disaster areas. So I think predominantly the South, Midwest, the Southeast, where we have hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and then out in California with fires and mudslides. These are churches that also will hold one of our box trucks, and these will be full of tools and equipment they can use on their own, but has everything you need to do from a mud out to sifting after a fire, chainsaw removal. So there's about 75 trucks of those parked around the country. And then we have our disaster relief equipment when it comes into the semis. These are NASCAR race trailers, but instead of a car in there, we have tools in the bottom and blue tarp plastic and other materials that we keep in the top portion where the car would usually sit. And then we have shower trailers, cook trailers, apartment trailers for staff. And those are scattered between California, Texas, and here in North Carolina. And when a disaster, is called, we call these churches, we go and pull up, and then we will live and work out of that church. And these are like-minded church with a mission statement that they agree to and attest to that Samaritan's Purse is going to be a part of. They sign on. And some of these churches, like my home church here in Boone, North Carolina, they signed on for years, knowing after Hurricane Helene that this would take a long time to recover. And often we transition to a rebuild. But for those that want to volunteer, they go to our website and they can sign up to be overnight volunteers. And then we have space for like day laborers or surrounding counties or people within the state that want to show up in the morning sessions and evening sessions. But each of our box trucks, and those are smaller trucks that go out to the community, they're actually ran by site leaders. Those are volunteers as well, but they're highly trained volunteers that are equipped on how to run all the equipment, how to do all the work between a mud out, chainsaw work, and running skid steers. And those come and partner and train with us, go to a couple-week training here in North Carolina, and then we rely on them to run our all-volunteer teams that are out there. So at a disaster site, we'll only have like 3 or 4 paid staff. The hundreds that are there showing up are mostly volunteers. So God brings us his very best.
Yeah, you can actually train too after the disaster as well, because that's not always the case. But I was, in 2010, I was the interim pastor of a church called Two Rivers in Nashville. And the Nashville floods hit, and I think you were deployed at the time, but the Nashville floods hit, and Samaritan's Purse contacted us and said, could we be one of those churches? And we're connected with the SBC, but I mean, you came, and you literally, that truck he's talking about was in our parking lot. They had a staff that supported us. We trained a whole bunch of new volunteers. They also had volunteers as well, because one of the things people don't realize is, disaster has phases, and there was no water in this area. I mean, this was where, CNN sent Anderson Cooper down to Nashville. People don't realize, it wasn't like what we're talking about in Texas, much larger. But there were 20 plus people who lost their lives, hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, and it all happened in just a few hours. So the disaster hits, but then there are phases that follow. So if you don't mind, Everett, explain to us a little bit about the timeline and how ministries like Samaritan's Purse, and I should add, by the way, if you go to edstetzerlive.com, there's a link to Edward's bio, but also to Samaritan's Purse, how you can give, which we encourage you to do so. You can give specifically to disaster or relief, or you can give in general. All that's over at edstetzerlive.com. So tell us, though, Edward, the phases here, what goes on, and how long does it take?
Yeah, so obviously we have teams that stand by and watch the news, and we know usually when storms are coming. But like this case in Texas, we knew maybe rain was coming, but no one expected this. This was not predicted. And as such the case, sometimes the severity of storms we don't realize. So we can often pre-po equipment. In the case of Texas, we didn't have to. We have equipment down in Capel, Texas, not too far away. But the immediate, we'll send assessors, and Samaritan's Purse either has assessors that live in that area that are trained, and our church partners that know how to do it, or we fly them in. And we'll come and determine using one of our aircraft that we can get people there quickly, assess, find the churches, see exactly what the needs is, work with the emergency managers. Now, remember, most of these emergency managers have never actually lived through an emergency before. And because the ones that have, unfortunately, will usually retire or quit their job after one of these disasters. It takes a heavy toll on them, and there's a lot of spiritual warfare. But we'll come in and try to be uplifting to them, because our team has gone through a lot of disasters, and talk them through how the volunteer response is going to be, what's going to be needed. And so that first part's assessment, finding the areas that we need to actually deploy to, then the equipment goes in. And that's usually about a day or two after the storm. And we start setting up, getting ready for volunteers to come stay, because usually after one of these storms, they're still doing search and rescue. We can't be out there in certain areas while they're still looking for people. And then when given the all clear from the emergency managers, our volunteers will usually start going in and conducting mud outs or tree removal. And this, depending on the severity of the storm and, the different issues specific to that disaster, will usually be about 2 or 3 days after the event. Then we're given approval to start going into certain areas and start working. And we'll do that for a couple weeks. We'll do what we call work orders, where homeowners sign up and ask us to come work on their home with volunteers. At that time, we're also looking to see if we need to transition to what we call rebuild. And this is where Samaritan's Purse will build homes and remodel homes for the underinsured and non-insured. These are people that would by no means be able to get back into their house. So I would bring up Hurricane Helene here, for instance. Yeah. We had many people here in Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, they lost their homes. They did not have flood insurance because either they couldn't afford it, or it was never a thought because they were so high up on the mountain, you wouldn't expect, to get flooded. But they got hit by a mudslide, or the water actually did reach them. And they also lost their cars. And so they had lost their cars. The insurance either doesn't cover it and didn't cover their house, and say they're a school teacher and a sheriff deputy. They would never get out of that financial hole that they're in. And so Samaritan's Purse has come in and not only bought them a new mode of transportation, a brand new car, but also gives them a new home at no cost to them. It is a free gift that we say is built was paid for at the cross and in the blood. And so unlike other organizations that are out there, usually there's still a mortgage that goes with this home. Our case managers will go through, and for those that were in a mobile home, we usually put you back in a mobile home because of tax reasons. If I built you a stick-built home, you would probably lose your house later in taxes. So we put you back in a mobile home, and if you were in a stick-built, we'll put you back in a stick-built home, a nice home, fully furnished. All these homes will come fully furnished, so when you move in, you're ready to live. That all depends. Timing on that can sometimes take 2 years to 3 years. So to give you an example, when I went to Mayfield, Kentucky, if you remember, a tornado hit Mayfield around Christmas, and we had volunteers out Christmas Day. I was out there working with them on Christmas Day. 300 volunteers, actually, 200 to 300 volunteers on Christmas Day. It was unbelievable opportunity for me to serve in Mayfield. Then we went into a rebuild, and we built 82 homes. That took about 2 years. Matter of fact, we built one neighborhood, 60 homes from the ground up, roads, sidewalks, had it incorporated into the city limits. And then we gift those. I did 2 home dedications, got in the airplane, landed back in North Carolina in the rain, and the rain didn't stop for 4 days. That was Hurricane Helene. So that gives you a timeline, sometimes 2 to 3 years. We're still in an area. We're still in Maui. We just dedicated our first homes in Maui after the fire. So disasters go from immediate disaster relief that could be 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 months, 5, 6 months in the case of Helene, and then into 3 or 4 years that it's going to take that we're going to be a part of rebuild. So bottom line is we don't go anywhere until the job's done. And we always partner through the local church, because when we do leave, that church is going to still be there. Are they more equipped to share the gospel, to mentor and disciple these new believers that came to Christ through our volunteers? Because it's all about the gospel. That's why we go.
So good, so good. And I can't wait to unpack more about where you share the faith. Let me say our experience at Two Rivers with the Samaritan's Purse really changed our church in powerful ways. And I'll talk some about that as well. And we're going to take your calls also about disaster relief, maybe how you can get involved, questions you have, what's going on. Our number is 877-548-3675. Give us a call here at 877 877 548 3675. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. I'm Ed Stetzer. I'm actually in Southern California for a change. The last few shows have been in around the world, different places, and so good to be here locally as well. And of course, you know, when you think about California, some of you think about wildfires, and you should. There have been some pretty shocking examples in the last year. And maybe you think about Samaritan's Purse, and you should, because they're engaged there and engaged in other places as well. But I do want to invite your calls in and around the subject of disaster relief. Some of you may have been involved and engaged in that. Love to hear your short story. Love to hear how that went, what that involved. Our number is 877-548-3675. Or maybe you have questions about, you know, right now we're all seeing here in South Texas, and, you know, just jarring and sad and at all so many levels. Maybe you got questions about what happens next, or about that situation, or about Samaritan's Purse. It's 877-548-3675. Again, 877-548-3675. So, Edward, you mentioned that you work with local churches now, and you leave behind a local church that's making disciples and more. So when when Samaritan's Purse called, and after the Nashville flood, they wanted to put one of those big trucks and kind of and we actually gave you offices and areas inside of our church. It was one in Two Rivers, which is sort of right across the street from Opryland, that had received, you know, hundreds of $millions of flooding. This was, you know, in Nashville, this was such a big story. Everyone else was paying attention to this guy who made a fake UFO and sort of said his kid was in it and was flying across the country. And so a lot of people missed just how big this was. Samaritan's Purse didn't. So they came, plop your command center at our church and a church down in Franklin. And what they didn't know, is our church, I was the interim pastor because the church had just blown up. It was on the front page of the newspaper 5 times in Nashville. People suing the pastor, division, walkouts, protests. And then for some crazy reason, I agreed to be their interim after all this. And then the Nashville floods came. And I got to tell you, Edward, that when we partnered with Samaritan's Purse, you know, when I was out doing Samaritan's Purse stuff, when we partnered with Samaritan's Purse, we got the whole church mobilized. That whole community started thinking about our church differently. They didn't think about that's the church that blew up on the front page of the news. They thought that's the church that has the water supplies, and people were coming up and picking up all the things that you mentioned. So I love the connection to local church, but also your people, and you encouraged us to share the gospel when we had opportunity and openings, and we did countless times. So talk to me a little bit, because your dad Franklin leads both the BGEA, the Evangelistic Association, and Samaritan's Purse. And I love the fact that you make sure that evangelism is a part of everything you do. How do you do that and when do you do that? Because, it can be controversial. You're not showing up knocking on doors and saying, hey, can we tell you about Jesus, and then we'll mud out your house. So tell us a little bit about how you do that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. We get it often. People out there, are you out there proselytizing or take advantage of those that are hurting in the storms? The answer is no. People can sign up for work orders, and our volunteers show up. Our assessors go up and look at people's homes and get the volunteers, sign them up to come out the next afternoon or later in the week. And our orange shirts start, some of these homes you go to and they'll have like 6 trees on the roof, limbs all down, water that came through the house. And that homeowner wants to know, well, where do I start? And especially if they're elderly or handicapped, they have no one to help them. And they want to know if they're forgotten and forsaken. And so just like the story of the Good Samaritan, Samaritan's Purse will go meet the immediate needs of those that are in the ditches of the world. And we start clearing out. But what I notice is part of the people that have lived and survived a disaster, they're in shock, and they can stay within shock. I'm not a psychologist, and you're clearly a lot smarter when it comes to me and educated in this, but people will remain in shock for quite some time. And what I've noticed is just by some of our orange shirts out there, cleaning up their home, that homeowner is going to start talking. Even the hardest of souls and the most broken of people who don't even want to say a word, they'll come out and want to know, who are these orange shirts that have come from all over the world sometimes? Like in Helene, we had people come from Germany, Australia, Canada to come down and volunteer in Eastern North Carolina, and the homeowner will hear the accent and be like, "Why are you here?" And because we love you, but more importantly, Christ loves you. And that homeowner will start telling their survival story, and that's part of the healing process, I think, just talking. And then they'll ask again, "Why are you here?" And that's the chance to say, as much as we love you, Christ loves you, and he loves you so much that he sent his only son. We also partner, as you said, with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. Now, I carry the last name Graham. I have a big nose and chin that looks just like my grandfather's. That's
Yes,
all
you
I
do.
got out of this. I didn't get his preaching ability, but I clearly represent that ministry as well. But we have trained chaplains. My dad started this after 9/11. You brought that up earlier. In order to get, there was not enough pastors and chaplains in New York, unfortunately, to handle all the calls that the law enforcement had to do about families, to do the knock on the doors. And so we help provide chaplains, but dad needed to get them credentialed. And so we do those through these courses, these CISM courses that are expected through the local VOADs, state VOADs. These are a volunteer organization that exists in each state that manages all the volunteers out there. But they allow our chaplains who are trained in sharing hope in crisis. They're trained how to listen, but also to be bold with the gospel and to be able to answer those tough questions that you often hear after disaster. And so our orange shirts do the manual labor. Sometimes they also do the listening and the sharing of the gospel, but we also have the chaplains there on those locations. Chaplains are extremely important to what we do, one of the most vital things that we do. And then when people make decisions for Christ, those chaplains help them get handed over to one of the local churches we're partnering with, or a church in that area that we know and trust will come and disciple and follow up with these people that have lost so much.
Yeah, and I will tell you, the opportunity is just so great. And I just have, this long affinity and appreciation for, the all things Billy Graham, as you know. And I actually started my first church. I was 21 years of age in the inner city of Buffalo, New York. We started from a Billy Graham crusade. So love all of, but for me, I was just struck by the fact that, and again, when we were we were low level volunteers. I mean, I could have, but I didn't go through the chaplaincy training, but you came to our church and helped us, and you just, Samaritan's Purse encouraged us to share the gospel in our orange shirts and in appropriate ways, and I'm so thankful for that. And so saw the same thing with the North American Mission Board. So I think that's a key part of the way we actually show the love of Christ is we include sharing the love of Christ as well. Well, we're going to go to the calls. Let me again invite people. Again, our number is 877-548-3675. Let me say to you again, we'd love to hear from you about maybe how you have been engaged in some of this. And by the way, too, I'm going to specifically talk about Hurricane Helene in a bit because, boy, that just came home to you, Edward. Yeah. But how people have participated in this, but also maybe questions that you have, what's going on in Texas. Again, our number is 877-548-3675. We're going to go to Elizabeth in Ohio. You're live on the air, Elizabeth. Let's jump right in.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to share, I wasn't personally there in Hurricane Helene, but I have a brother who is a truck driver, and he was called in to haul water. And the first thing I thought when my sister and I were praying for him was, hauling water? They're covered with water. He said, but you can't drink it. There was no drinking water, no bathing or cooking water. So tankers are driving water in so that people can survive, so they can eat. And he just was devastated. He drove probably 12 hours a day. His shift was. He was there for over a week, 12 hours a day, and then they refreshed the drivers out. But he would go, fill up a tanker, bring water, and as soon as he would empty it, he would go back. But the thing he noticed the most was the people. He said the first thing he noticed was most of them looked like they were just in shock. It was total devastation. They had lost everything. They had nothing. They're just milling around. There's no place to go. And then he started seeing people start to pool their resources and work together and care for each other. People were cooking on the streets and feeding people, just passersby. They were making makeshift bedding and things like that out of whatever they could find. It was crazy. Churches, neighbors, FEMA, everyone coming together, all these different people. And he knew he could go back home, and he was okay. He lives in another state, but he immediately got the call and just said, yes, of course. What can I do?
So good. What a great example. Again, thank you so much for your call. We got about 30 seconds, Edward. Talk to us about how you see people come together in these disasters.
Yeah, when I was down at just even this last deployment in Texas, I did see neighbors out helping neighbors and loving and serving one another. It's not true in every place I go. It sounds funny, but I do think there's a thing called Southern hospitality. But in other parts, I've done disasters up north in New York. They're not all the same, but neighbors will normally love their neighbors.
So good. We're going to continue our conversation with Edward Graham and your calls in just a minute. Stay with us. Okay, we're back at Stetzer Live. We're having a great conversation with Edward Graham. We're taking your calls. He's the COO of Samaritan's Purse. Again, our number, talking about disaster relief, maybe sharing your own experience or questions you might have. Our number is 877-548-3675. We're going to get to Bob in just a second. They're going to follow up with Jody after that. Edward, one of the things that for a lot of us, we've been watching this disaster in South Florida, and the Camp Mystic girls have just. I've got 3 daughters, and I don't know. It's probably just seeing those little suitcases, these little boxes that they bring. I mean, we have those still. The same thing right downstairs from camp. We'd go up to Ridgecrest up by you, and just to see. It's just so we've been just our hearts have been broken for these girls and their families. And I guess a big part of the question for many of us is like, how do we personally walk through that? I wrote about this a few years ago after a hurricane hit and I wrote in USA Today, and I actually cited Samaritan's Purse, and I looked to Mr. Rogers, who said, look to the helpers, the old Mr. Rogers in the sweater. He said, look to the helpers in the times of disaster, and that's what I do. So when I see, I'm thankful for the good work of Samaritan's Purse and other aid. That partly gives me comfort. But how do you find that in the midst of so much death and loss? And how would you encourage others to see this and to respond? How might we respond? Grieve? How do we walk through that and more?
Yeah. And, we do, unfortunately, almost every disaster we go to is a community dealing with loss. And this loss is horrific down in Texas along the Guadalupe River just because of all the camps there, but also campsites, people that were just camping along the river. It's a very popular vacation site, especially along the 4th of July. But I had just dropped my kid off at Cedar Cliff, which is the old Billy Graham in the former the Cove camp that's been bought out by someone else now. But it's a great camp. But you don't drop your kid off thinking that this is going to happen. And so there's nothing I believe you can truly tell a parent that will make them feel better. I think of what a good friend of mine, Greg Laurie, we called him Uncle Greg, but a well-known pastor. I'm sure you know him out in California.
In Southern California, come on.
In Southern California, yeah. But when he lost his son, Christopher, we called him Topher.
Right.
I listened to him one time when I was living up in Seattle, when I was in the Army. He came to speak there shortly after the death of his son. And he was telling this crowd, I'm a jealous man. I know what scripture says, but I want my son. Everyone said, oh, your son's in a better place. And that used to, hurt him and anger him because he wants his son here. He knows that to be true. And I know scripture tells us nothing can separate us from the love of God. But I am a firm believer in the power of prayer. So during disasters, people ask me, what can they do? Well, we need to pray. There is power when the church comes together and prays for these communities, these families that is all. We should be praying first, because people ask, well, how do I donate? I want you not to donate. I want you praying. And if you want to get involved, come volunteer. That's the easiest way. After praying for them is to get involved, and we bathe these homes in prayer. When we show up, these families, and we're volunteering, they pray with the homeowner before they start. They ask if they can. Sometimes the homeowner says no, but usually before we leave, the homeowner almost all the time will say, will you come pray with me again? And we'll pray when we leave, and prayer works. And so, I I've got a young lady that's sitting here in my recording studio with me. I first met her during Hurricane Helene. I landed in her community in Yancey County. It was called Pensacola, North Carolina, a beautiful valley, beautiful valley. I landed there in our helicopter. We had leased a bunch of helicopters, a bunch of NASCAR helicopters come. The Army gave us their helicopters to use. It was the largest civilian airlift in history, and that's how we kept Western North Carolina going with food and water, and then heating sources and generators. But I remember landing in her community, and there was probably about 100 people that were at the fire station gathered there to work and serve as a community and offload the helicopters when they came in. But I remember listening to those stories. They had lost a little boy there. He was a Ukrainian and came from Ukraine during the war. He lost his life in the hurricane and the flood, and this small community was grieving and reeling on that. This young lady who's in my studio now, she's interning us from Liberty. That's where I first met her. But I think of this community, and when can they laugh and smile again? When's it okay to go on with life? And I think going out there and volunteering and help serve and getting these communities back lets them know they're not forgotten. They're not forsaken. The world sees them. The church sees them. And it's also living out what I believe Christ has called us to love your neighbor that's in the ditch, just like the story of the Good Samaritan. And we have a responsibility to go love our neighbors after these horrible, horrific disasters. You need to speak the gospel. We have to preach boldly, but we also have to, I believe, go out and live it. I don't like the saying where it says sometimes preach the gospel and sometimes use words. That is blasphemy. That is not what Scripture tells us. Scripture tells us to be bold with the gospel, but I think also we're going to be judged off the quality of our work.
Yeah, and that quote is often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. There's only two problems. He never said it. And number two, it's terrible theologies. But other than that, people put it on Facebook all the time. But I do think, again, they'll see your good deeds and give glory to your fathers in heaven. And so I'm so thankful for the good work that you're doing. Now, I was, watching when Hurricane Helene hit. And, I don't think any of us knew at first just how significant it was. But as that become clearer and clearer, I immediately thought of you guys because, one of when the people who do disaster relief are in the middle of the disaster, it often makes it impossible to engage in the work. And so you were, I guess, were you far enough away? This to me,
we're right in the middle of
it. That's what I thought. So how did you? Because remember back to my original story, we had to put all those units away from the path of Katrina. But you're right in the path of it. So how did you get up and running again after the disaster hit?
Yeah, so where I'm actually doing this interview right now was surrounded by water. It was up to my waist. Wow. My dad was up in Alaska, and I was FaceTiming him. He's like, because it took me, I live 2 miles from here, and it took me about an hour to get here, cutting trees and moving and driving through. I don't have streams to cross. I crossed 2 rivers to get here. That's how bad it was. And I called my dad. I was like, Dad, it's bad. But fortunately, we keep most of our disaster relief equipment now off the mountain from Boone, about 40 minutes away, a place called North Wilkesboro. That's the home of NASCAR, the home of Lowe's Hardware. It all started there. But we keep our warehouses down there. And then we have other equipment, like I said, in Texas and out in California. We even have equipment in Canada. In the case of Helene, our equipment came all the way down from Canada, along with Canadian volunteers. They worked our places down in Florida. And then our trucks never got bogged down. Now, we had to get to these places, like Asheville is one of our disaster sites we worked out of during Helene, which was very difficult to get to at the time, even from where we are. And then also in Yancey County, and then in a place called Burnsville, right outside of Yancey and Mitchell counties, and then Boone. But that's why we had to use helicopters to get around. This storm was different from anything else. Matter of fact, we bought additional helicopters on top of what we already owned with Samaritan's Purse after this storm. But we took what we learned with our overseas deployments. We've been talking about domestic. We also do international. We have cargo planes. We can have a hospital anywhere in the world in about 36 hours. But we took what we learned and how we deploy overseas, and I put that team in charge of our helicopter program here. And so we also moved away from our traditional model of just mucking out homes and chainsaw work to feeding and working with local fire stations and churches. And we had this network that God gave us through Operation Christmas Child of all these churches up here in the mountains that just started reporting to us. And basically we came like their Amazon, and we just started delivering to these churches and fire stations the supplies they needed via helicopters. And we did that for a few weeks, almost about 2 months, the helicopter program. Boone International Airport. Boone International Airport's a paved strip, no tower, 2 hangars, and it looks like someone's driveway. It's right beside our office. We turned it into a helicopter landing pad. We closed it to fixed wing traffic, and we had over 300 air missions flew out of the Boone Airport just to support that, 370, I think, to be exact. So unbelievable opportunity where we combine both our international disaster relief with our domestic. But because our equipment wasn't bogged down up here, we were able to get it out and start working right away. I mean, we started working that weekend. Our helicopters, matter of fact, on Saturday, started flying supplies into Avery County to a cutoff college there. Their school president called me needing water and food, and we started using our helicopter in the rain, actually, to start flying stuff in until weather bogged us back down.
Wow. Unbelievable. One of the largest, if not the largest airlift in history going on there in that important area. We're going to continue our conversation with Edward Graham in just a moment. And again, I haven't gotten to much calls because I'm so interested in the topic. I'm asking too many questions. But Bob and Jody and Janet and Melinda, stay on the line so we can continue our conversation with Edward Graham and your questions and comments when we return. Again, go to edstetzerlive.com. Samaritan's Purse links there. That article I mentioned I wrote about disaster relief in USA Today's in there. More information on how to give and get involved. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back. Final segment. And by the way, I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Ed Stetzer. I just jumped into this conversation about disaster relief because it's important to me. I'm the dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University out here in California, which is why the reference to Greg Laurie being in California. So, and thankful for having Edward Graham on our program today. He's the COO of Samaritan's Purse, which is doing such great work around the world, and we're thankful for their good work. We're taking your calls and kind of thinking through and talking through disaster relief, how we might respond to that and more. If you go to edstetzerlive.com, remember you see all the links that are there and how you might get involved. Let's go to Bob in Chicago. Bob, you're live on the air. Please jump right in.
Yes, I'd like to know that I know Samaritan's Purse has been involved with international events around the world, including those that are in war-torn countries like the Sudan in years past. What might you be doing, if anything, in the Ukraine, for example?
Yeah. Super question, Bob. Thanks so much for the call. As a matter of fact, let me add to this, Edward. Last time I was in the Samaritan's Purse office with your dad, we were having a meeting, Franklin Graham, and he had someone needed to talk to him about something, and so he just told me. So I sat there, and they brought in this diorama, I guess they call it, this little design of a hospital they were building in Iraq and making sure the blast walls were big enough to withstand suicide bombers. And I got to tell you, that's a sobering, your dad just kind of walked through this thing. I listened in, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that look like? Are you still involved in Iraq? Are you involved in Ukraine? What are you doing around the world?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. We're still in Iraq. We're in northern Iraq where we had that hospital set up, but we actually have an office there that works in and out of Syria as well. Been in Ukraine since even before the war. This recent fighting, when I say the war, these last few years, we've done Operation Christmas Child there. We had 2,300 churches doing Operation Christmas Child. But in the first week of the war, I traveled there and crossed the border with a hospital that we set up in Lviv because we thought Lviv would be the new capital. And so Kyiv was completely surrounded at that point, being bombarded by the Russians. They would get pushed back. But we started treating people. I went to the train stations and you saw these displaced people coming out. Remind me of the old black and white videos from World War II. Trains are still very central to Europe and travel in that part of Europe. And we started even treating, had a clinic down at the train stations as people was moving to the border. The human line at the border, the car line was 14 kilometers long and not moving. Wow. The human line was 2 kilometers long, but we're still there. We still have work going on. We did a hospital further, closer to the front lines. And a few years ago, it got bombed by the Russians. They were deliberately targeting us based off our cell phones. And so a lot of lessons learned there. But we are still doing feeding programs. Matter of fact, probably the largest feeder in Ukraine. We've been feeding the Red Zone since the war started, using that Operation Christmas Child Network, where God meant it more for just evangelism and passing out shoeboxes, sharing the gospel. Turned it into a food network through local churches, and the pastors do the feeding, provide medical supplies. We've trained chaplains there. But we have an office there in Kyiv with a staff of about 60 people, full-time staff, still doing a lot of work. And we have left money, dedicated money that we won't touch, that we're assigning to the rebuild. So when there is eventually a peace agreement, we will start rebuilding churches and do counseling programs there, because after a war like that, there's going to be a great need for Christian counseling for a long time.
For sure, for sure. We have Talbot Seminary has an extension center in Kyiv, and I just stuck in there this summer, and they're aware and thankful for your work, and also, even at the seminary, we're recognizing the need for counseling is going to be significant. Let's go to Melinda in Chattanooga. Melinda, you're live on the air.
Hi. I just wanted to comment on your efforts. You had back in some flooding during in Houston, Texas, and the surrounding areas. My parents lived in Conroe, and your missionary ministry came out and helped my parents rebuild their home to the extent that they had to do a lot of remodeling. And the biggest thing is that you prayed with my parents, specifically my mother, and she wasn't sure if she was saved or not. And due to your blessings, she was indeed saved, and she's now went to heaven. But I have the Bible that all of your volunteers signed.
Oh, Melinda, that is so great. And thank you for your call. Sorry about that. I thought you were done, but thank you so much for your call. What a great story. What a great example. Let's go to Jody in Chicagoland. Jody, you're live on the air. And just in case everyone knows, we're trying to squeeze in a few calls, so we want to make those calls relatively quick. So jump in, Jody.
Hi. You know what? One of the things I work with a non-for-profit here in the Chicagoland area, and we help others in need. And one of the things that we've noticed that is really, really helpful is when any of these destructions take place, really sticking to what they need at a given time. Because we take a lot of stuff in and we do the sorting, it's really helpful that we stick to what each of what's needed at the disaster sites. Because what happens is the churches get so overflowed with stuff. Like Florida doesn't need skis in a big semi truck. So what we try to do up here is we try to sort stuff before we send it out. We work with 12 distribution sites here, and we actually went down to Boone because my brother-in-law and sister are in Boone, North Carolina. We actually took a bus down there, and we actually donated the bus too, full of stuff. But we waited too with the things for households about a month and a half afterwards, when they were already starting to get the houses and people were getting back in their houses and that kind of stuff. So that's something for all the listeners to know, like stick to what they really, really need. We've been working on a model actually called Boxes of Miracles stores to eventually be distribution centers where they bring in the donations, we sort them, and we get them to the destruction sites. So, but anyways, that's just something, but we really appreciate the Americans Purse. So thankful.
Thank you so much, Jody, for your call. What a great example. I mean, how do you do that, Edward? Like, do you receive? First of all, let me just say the best thing that all of us can give in the time of disaster is actually money, because it enables these organizations, trusted organizations, to then buy resources. But how do you deal with donations in kind, Edward?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to back up to Melinda for sharing a story about her parents and knowing that her mother is in heaven. I'll never get tired of those stories. You know, even from when people tell me stories about my grandfather and how people come to Christ. Amen. And whatever site leader team and volunteers showed up at that house or worked and remodeled, and when we do remodel or build a house, we'll sign the studs of the house. We'll put scripture on those studs and the foundation of the house. So it is bathed in prayer, but also the scriptures. And so whoever tears that house down later to remodel, they're going to get evangelized too.
That's so cool.
Thank you. Thank you, Melinda, for sharing that. As far as donations, gift in kind, when it comes to disasters, Samaritan's Purse rarely takes gift in kinds. We have warehouses full of the stuff that we do and what we need to accomplish our mission. We change and adjust, but to take gifts in kind, you need a staff to kind of organize and take the stuff that's good and bad. And we don't really have time for that. So we always pass off to local churches that are doing that. During Hurricane Helene, there were so many people bringing stuff in. Our local church helped out with that, and we gave volunteers to help sort it, and I appreciate it. But you bring up a good point. You know, what I always ask for is first the prayers and then come volunteer. I need volunteer labor. I have the equipment. I just need people to put on the work gloves and go get dirty and then be bold with the gospel. And last, if you can, or you feel like you're in a place where you can't volunteer, you're too far away, maybe health reasons, then sure, go online and you can donate. But it is best to find those organizations that are already there. We talked about the Southern Baptist earlier, the North American Mission Board. There's great organizations that I see out there. Convoy of Hope, each have their niche. There's organizations that feed to, like Mercy Chefs. We don't normally do feeding in this country. Our food stuff's done overseas. Go find those that are equipped to do it. If you're called to something, go online and find those reputable Christ-centered organizations. Make sure they're Christ. There's a lot of junk out there and a lot of organizations that are just chasing cameras in order to make, and then they'll leave after 2 weeks. I always tell people there's reputable ones out there. I'd like to think we're one of them. We're going to do exactly what we say we're going to do. If not, I'll lose the trust of the widow's mite. But second, North American Mission Board, your local Baptist church, they do incredible work. I always see them there. So those are always good ones right there.
Well, Edward, it's been great to have you on the program, and thank you for your good work. Thank you for what's going on with Samaritan's Purse. We're so appreciative of you as well. Thank you for our callers for calling in as well. Remember, Ed Stetzer Live can also be listened to as a podcast. I just got a report like thousands and thousands of you listened by podcast. Go to edstetzerlive.com. Click through the Moody Radio app. You can download that via podcast as well. And remember, Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.
Let me help you sort through tough questions that lead to ultimate answers. I'm Michael Rydelnik, and each weekend on Open Line, I offer biblical, honest, and down-to-earth insights and encouragement to help you understand God's truth and apply it to daily life. Join the Bible study on Open Line with me, Dr. Michael Rydelnik, every Saturday.
Tune into the conversation by subscribing to the Open Line podcast today.